This is a film study on the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch. In this fight, Conor Benn showed some good boxing IQ. So we will look at the subtle boxing strategies and hopefully aid understanding. Now, Conor Benn is part of the boxing algorithm, but he also has some underestimated boxing skills. Let's talk about it. You can see the stance difference with Conor Benn's weight more firmly on his back foot. Chris Eubank Jr. steps to the right, fires a jab. Conor steps back and uses the measuring left to blur his vision. Now the step back takes away the distance and the measuring jab gives even more defensive insurance. Conor Benn does a big foot feint and this draws a defensive reaction from Chris as he is stepping to his right. Now Conor does a subtle jab feint which draws a reaction from Chris Eubank Jr.'s glove. Conor dips to the left, changing levels and gets under Chris Eubank Jr.'s jab. Chris Eubank Jr. is now circling to his left with small subtle steps but is close to the ropes. Conor feints with the jab and throws a big right to the body which lands. Conor's left hand feint to the head sets up the body shot and Chris Eubank Jr. step to the left creates a great angle for the right hand. Also, being on the ropes means that Chris Eubank Jr. can't use the step back defensive system. This is controlled aggression. Chris Eubank Jr. throws a double jab low to the head. Conor Benn dips to his right and steps back, avoiding the punches. Conor gets back in range and throws a jab to the head. It misses and Chris Eubank Jr. transitions his hands to a high defense. Eubank steps to his left, creating a new angle, while Conor capitalizes on the angle and lands a jab to the head. At this point, Conor is putting on front foot pressure. Conor throws a hard jab followed by a hard straight right. Conor throws the straight right with his head going past his front foot. This commitment to the right hand is called punching through the target. Now there is a risk here. You increase the chances to hurt your opponent with this, but there is a greater opportunity for your opponent to counter. After throwing the right, Conor pushes out his left to spoil any counter opportunities. Conor does a slight right hand feint and attempts a left feint to the head and a right hook to the body. They end up in a clinch, and this part is important. Conor Benn wraps up the hands of Chris Eubank Jr. and pushes Eubank back to the ropes. This indicates strength and a dominant position. Now the feints are creating the attacks and Conor Benn is being physically dominant in the clinch. Conor measures with the left. He then does a feint with both hands. This feint creates a defensive reaction from Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. steps forward and they both end up in a clinch. Conor Benn marches Chris back to the ropes, showing strength. He then puts his head on Chris Eubank Jr.'s chest and tilts his head slightly to the right. This creates an angle for the right hand to the head. Conor again puts his head deep into the left side of Chris Eubank Jr.'s chest. Eubank now has his weight on his back foot. This creates an angle for the right uppercut from Conor Benn. Conor throws this from a low level and Chris Eubank Jr. can't see it. Now Chris Eubank Jr. is holding the left arm of Conor, which nullifies his left, but Conor is creating angles for the backhand in the clinch. Again, this is good innovation from Conor Benn. Also, Conor Benn appears stronger and more dominant. So when we talk about Conor Benn and when we talk about, the Conor Benn Eubank fights, I think it's important to preface this with the following statement that in boxing there are levels. In boxing there are levels. There's British level, European level, championship level, etc. And many people speculate, often negatively, maybe unfairly, what level Conor Benn is on. But what may be absolute, or what may be more absolute, if such thing could exist, is that Conor Benn, through the Eubank fights, through those two fights, he has improved. From the Eubank Jr. fights, he has shown evolution. Boxing can go in a variety of ways when it comes to boxers. they can progress, they can go backwards, or they could stay the same. Other times they can reach a peak. Think of Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson. Fantastic performance. Or Pacquiao versus Cotto. Or Roy Jones versus James Toney. These are times when fighters have reached like a magical peak. Now, the Eubank Jr. fight has had criticisms. And let's be honest. Let's be really honest. Perhaps many of those criticisms are justified. However, think of this. You can criticize the performance and still acknowledge the improvements. Let me repeat. You can criticize the performance and still acknowledge the improvements. And then the next question, or the obvious question, would be, well, what are the improvements? In a simple sense, well, I think I made my case what the improvements were in the beginning segment of this video. But in simple terms, the improvements were the following: the feints, the jab, the step back, the head movement, and more intelligent body work. Conor Benn, in a sense, has improved his boxing intelligence. He has improved his boxing intelligence. And yes, he is an emotional fighter, and often when we think of emotions, we don't think of intelligence. But emotions need to be challenged through logical attack strategies if they're going to be effective. And in the second fight, there was what we call a method to the madness. In this sense, or for this camp, or for that second fight, Conor was, in a sense, committed to the mastery of boxing, and hopefully that continues. And also in the Eubank fights, there were significant mental tests, no pun intended, whether it was the failed test, the first fight, the build-up, the cancellations, etc. And think of this, our psychological makeup is often complementary to our pugilistic skills, and Conor Benn has shown a psychological toughness. Now, boxing purists love the mastery of boxing. They love it. I guess you could ask the question, what is a boxing purist? But I think that's a bit of a deflection. But people that are passionate about boxing, they love the mastery of boxing, generally speaking. And from that perspective, I think the second fight is a reference that Conor Benn is invested. He's invested in that currency. If the skill or mastery of boxing is a currency, then Conor Benn has made an investment. But that, of course, doesn't mean that there's genuine criticism, because criticism can come from a hateful place or it can come from a genuine place. But let's have the cognitive ability to separate the politics, the personality, and the boxing, because they are separate things. Also, there's another context here, and that's from a marketing perspective. Conor Benn is a part of the boxing algorithm. He's part of the British boxing algorithm, the boxing algorithm, and now it looks like he's going to be a part of the American boxing algorithm. For example, his first fight with Chris Eubank, one of the videos has 6.1 million views, very impressive. And I saw another marketing video of the first fight, which had 1.8 million views. Metaphorically speaking, people are criticizing. They're criticizing the chapters. But even though they criticize the chapters, they are reading the book and they're paying for the book, figuratively speaking. People are interested. People might hate. They might have some real unfavorable things to say, but they're invested. And the marketing machine of Conor Benn will probably only get bigger. I guess, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that Conor Benn is trying to master the craft of boxing. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. It's important that we acknowledge that evolution. It's important that we acknowledge that currently he is a sincere student of the boxing game. Now that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your questions, your comments, and your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, all you have to do is simply like and subscribe. And if you want more content, if you want to watch more content, then click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much, much appreciated. Peace.